Hi, good morning, everybody. We are in the middle of our series, Thrift, and what we're doing is we're sending the preachers out and we're going to thrift stores and we're looking for somebody else's giveaway pile, somebody else's junk, and we're gonna take that trash and we're gonna try to find some treasure in it. And somehow in all of that, it's like Scripture loves to speak to this kind of story. And I've invited Hannah up. Our children's ministry largely takes a break during the summer. And we have a new school year that we're getting ready for. That's coming around in just a few weeks. And I thought, you know what, Hannah, I'm not a thrifter. I've done Amazon Marketplace maybe once or twice, but I'm not that kind of person. So I asked you to thrift for me and see what you could find. And so would you introduce what you brought up here today?
Sure. These are some very special thrifted items, but I want to take you back first. So my grandmother was an artist, a very, very talented artist amongst over lots of different mediums. I remember she carved her own rubber stamps. She sewed the baptismal gown that all 7 of my siblings and even my daughter wore for our baptism. She even dabbled in metalwork for a while and made the cross that my dad, who's a pastor, wears every Sunday. But later in her life, she got into pottery. And I'm sure many of you know that holding on to something from a loved one who's already gone to heaven just feels really precious to you, especially if they made it themselves. So when she passed away young, when I was in 7th grade, all of us kids and grandkids and everyone in the family wanted a piece of her pottery. So I will say these 2 little ones are mine, but as you can see, there's like chips and cracks because we all know that pottery is just very, very fragile. And you can try your best to be very precious with it and just accidents happen. But even though she's been gone for 20 years, my sister, who's an avid thrifter, she thought on a whim one day to just type in Carol Roth pottery on eBay, and she was delighted and surprised to find some pieces of my grandmother's because she sold her pottery at Renaissance festivals and art fairs all throughout Michigan. And so this is the one that I have on loan from my sister with very strict instructions to be very careful with it, of course. Sure. Pastor Max was bringing it over here and I was like,
I know, I don't trust him either.
But it's okay, it's all intact, it's all intact. But what's really cool about it is I think that most thrifting is buying secondhand, so I would argue that buying this on eBay probably counts for our series here. But what's really cool is that the woman that my sister bought this from, she just recognized the pottery and recognized my grandmother's artwork. She always painted birds and nature. She was really inspired by that. But a year after my sister bought this piece, the woman noticed another piece of pottery at an estate sale. And it was my grandmother's, and she purchased it and sent it to my sister states away. So this is our thrifted item this morning.
Awesome. When you came up with this idea, I thought, oh, this is perfect. This is kind of the main Bible verse section that I wanted to look at when we were planning this series. Chuck and I normally, we're planning series a lot of times 3 months in advance. And so what we're kind of laying down, what the timeline's gonna look at, we look at the whole year and just say, hey, we have the people in God for a year in church. What do we want them to learn in a year? What do we want them to put into their lives in a year? And obviously Christmas is Christmas and Easter is Easter. So some of it is pretty well determined. But when we got to this series, we thought, you know, the inspiration for Trash to Treasure for the series Thrift is 2 Corinthians 4. And I want to share those several verses with you. This is a bigger teaching that St. Paul was doing. But this is just a really beautiful verse. Paul writes, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." Jars of clay. Some of them look pretty darn perfect, but then there's gonna be a lot of them that are cracked. There's gonna be a lot of them that are chipped. And in many ways, as Christians, that's how we feel. Whether it's physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, we feel cracked on the outside. We feel the blemishes that we have. We know the brokenness that's inside of us. And yet, Paul says, that is true. And you're gonna go through a whole bunch of stuff. But there's also something far more precious. There's treasure inside of you. There's gospel gold that the Holy Spirit has put inside of you. We call this faith, but it's so much more than that. It's God at work in you. So when we get to a verse like this, and even just this example, like I think this is so perfect for the series. I think it's especially great that you guys have gone out and like tried to find more and more and more. And a part of why I thought Hannah needed to be one of the people that I talked to during the summer is because I'm thinking about our kids and our grandkids. The lie that a lot of times can happen, especially in a wealthy country like America, is we can begin to think that we can shelter our kids, that we can keep them safe. And when they're young, sometimes this is seemingly possible. But then they get into school and there's gonna be bullies and you might try to intervene in that way, and then they get into work and they get fired from a job. You can't really protect your kids. And I think that's what Paul's talking about in this verse. Like, you're gonna get hard pressed. Sometimes you're gonna get crushed. Sometimes you're gonna have despair. We have to be honest with our kids. But how do we make sure that we put that gospel thing in their hearts so that they don't give up, so that they can continue to carry on?
I like that you called it gospel gold. I hadn't heard of that before, but the alliteration, it's really sticky. So I like the gospel gold because every child is called and equipped and gifted by God, and they have power inside of them. I tell my kids all the time, you have God's power inside of you, and I desperately want my kids and all the students that we know here to know that and really know that. I know that you want your kids to know that too, because we live in a world that is trying to whisper to them who they are, trying to tell them where to find their worth, trying to tell them what to spend their time on or what really matters. And in preparation for this message, I did some research and read some books, and I found some things that we're not going to be surprised at, unfortunately, but it's a hard look at the reality of what it is to grow up in the world right now. I read that we're seeing 1 in 3 adolescents dealing with anxiety, and in fact, 1 in 5 have had a major depressive episode just in this last year. And I want better for my kids. I know you want better for your kids. And I desperately want better for our kids here at Messiah. And like Jim said, we learn pretty early on that we can't protect them from everything. Even from when they're like learning to walk. Did anyone else like cover all the outlets and put the bumpers on the, you didn't do that?
I don't care. She's my 5th kid. At some point, like.
Well, some of us put bumpers on the hard corners of the furniture in our house, right? But kids always find a way to bump their heads, or they've got a goose egg, or they've got a black eye. No matter what you do to try to protect them, even from when they're toddling around, it just doesn't always work. And then as they get older, it does get harder. And I have that instinct, as I'm sure many of you do, to try to just pave the road in a clear, smooth way so they don't hit any obstacles, or help them to manage their problems. But as they get older, it becomes harder and harder, and we just realize that we really can't do that. And so the best thing to do to prepare our kids for the future, I think, is to start with the heart stuff. We want to give them resilience, emotional and spiritual resilience, so that they can get through life knowing with confidence that God is their maker and God is with them. Because the emotional and spiritual resilience, they're not separate things. They bleed into each other. They work together. Because when you're giving kids skills for getting through life that they need, just like practically, teach them breathing techniques, or teach them how to be brave, or teach them how to try a new thing, or get back up when they fall down. All of that is giving them confidence. And confidence truly, really does come from knowing who they are in God and that God will be with them. So sending them out into the world with confidence, with spiritual resilience, I think is one of the best ways we can prepare them.
Awesome. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I have some more things in here. Can I show you? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have some more thrifted items in here, and here are the 4 things. They're gonna represent some ways I think we need to we can give our kids spiritual resilience. Because that sounds like a big, weird, vague thing, but there are specific things we can do, parents. Okay, first of all, I have this little mirror, this little handheld mirror, which is good for checking to be sure you have nothing in your teeth when you are on a live stream, and also for looking at who you are. You take a look at the mirror, you see who you are, and we want kids to see they are baptized and beloved children of God. Because what God says about them matters more than what the world says about them, or even what they think about themselves. So, identity. We want to give kids identity. The second thing we want to give them is, okay, I've got a little watch here. That I just broke.
I didn't do it.
You know what? Sometimes thrifted items are not the highest quality, right? Okay. Well, I confess that I don't typically wear a watch, but our lives are dictated by the watch, aren't they? They're dictated by the time and routines, and our kids need spiritual habits. They need spiritual routines to give them resilience. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But the third thing I think they need is stories. So this is an adorable little photo album made out of a little book, and kids need to know how they are connected to the world around them, how they're connected to the people around them, and stories is an excellent way to do that. And a photo album helps you tell a story. The last thing I think that could give kids spiritual resilience is this is an email, so I didn't thrift this part of it, but this is an email that I got from a student, and I'll read it to you later, but it basically is sharing how she served in a way that was new for her, and then found that she was really gifted at that and sees a new purpose for the way that she could spend her time and her life to make a difference. So I think kids need identity, they need habits, they need stories, and they need purpose to build that resilience.
So when I think about a story of resilience, the one that comes to mind is Daniel. And most people, when you say Daniel in the Bible, they immediately say lion's den. But that's not the whole story. In fact, that's a kind of a minor part of the story. The story really begins with the exile of the Jewish people. They're literally taken out of their homeland. They're taken out of the nation of Israel. And the lower class, for the most part, are enslaved. Luckily for some of the nobility, their kids, their young men especially, were brought into the government of Babylon, because Babylon realized something. It's one thing to try to rule a people, but how do you actually rule them effectively? And Babylon was very good at this. In fact, if you look at a lot of the dynasties that went on and were able to, in a sense, like really take over much of the world, that is something that they had in common, is you had to bring the leaders of that people in close to you so that you could manage that people, you could govern that people more effectively. And Daniel was one of those people. Daniel was one of the noble boys who was brought into the government, and they actually let him sit at the king's table and eat from the king's table. But immediately David realized something. He was being separated from his people, from the everyday people, and if he ate at the king's table, he wanted to make sure that he didn't become like them. He wanted to keep his Jewish identity. And so he made a request that he would eat at the table, but only fruits and vegetables. And the reason he did this is he wanted to make sure that he didn't eat any meat from an animal that was killed the wrong way, or from an animal that was not a part of the Jewish kosher law. He wanted to make sure nothing was compromised about him. And this made the other nobility very uncomfortable. But Daniel said, test me in this, and see how I look after I've eaten this kind of diet. And he does it. Of course, he's in prayer the whole time. And fortunately, I guess what they noticed is that Daniel and the other Jewish nobility were healthier and better off than everybody else. Daniel's faithfulness and the way that he lived his life also led him to be able to be raised higher and higher into the government until he was one of the most trusted in all of Babylon. And then it's his habits of prayer that he wouldn't let go. For example, when some people tried to set him up, they actually passed a law that said, for 30 days, let's only pray to the king of Babylon. Like, how wonderful to do this for him. But Daniel was unwilling to do that because he knew in his faith that there was one true God. And so he was going to pray only to that true God, and he was going to do it day after day after day and multiple times a day. He was caught, and that's when he's thrown into the lion's den. And the king waited anxiously. In fact, he was there early in the morning, hoping somehow that Daniel was still alive. And then when he was, he actually gave praise to the one true God. So to me, that's a story of resilience. Mm-hmm. It's not like Daniel's family wanted this to happen. They didn't want exile. They didn't want people throwing him into a lion's den. But what they did is they prepared the young man, and more importantly, they prepared the faith, the spiritual resilience that was in that young man.
And so I think his story really illustrates for us some of the things we can still do for our children to give them that resilience. So if we go back to this identity piece, looking in the mirror, knowing who you are, even though he was taken from his homeland, taken away from the place of the faith of his fathers, he knew who he was still. He was in exile, but he was still a part of God's family. And for our children, we need them to know who they are, no matter what happens around them or what people say about them. Actually, I have a little video, which I think is a good illustration of how important this could be for your kids.
What happened?
And he told me a poo-poo head.
Oh no, but what are you?
A child thought.
That's right, baby.
If you didn't hear at the beginning, he said, Annie called me a poo-poo head.
Oh.
And his mama said, well, what are you? I'm a child of God. So I think half of the funny of that is the accent is very adorable on that child. But also, no matter who calls you what, including a poo-poo head, you are a child of God. I tell my kids that all the time. No one can take that away from you. A way that you could reinforce this with your kids, their true identity as children of God, is to celebrate their baptism. You could even celebrate it in a big way like you do their regular birthday, with lighting their baptismal candle, with taking a look at pictures from that day. I also like to encourage families to celebrate with water in some way. Maybe get them some water guns, do a water balloon fight, go to like a water park or something. Another way you could do it is write notes on their mirror, leave them notes in their lunch boxes. At bedtime, remind them who they are and whose they are. A fun way I did it when my kids were really little, before they could kind of understand those parts of it, is that just as I was giving them lotion after bath time, I would say, God made your arms. God made your arms are good. God made your legs, God made your belly, and God made you. And that's a really easy way that actually makes a big impact for kids knowing who they are. All right, the other thing we see is that Daniel, he had this habit of prayer. And it says that he went and did it 3 times a day. So with our broken watch, although this reminds us of our habits, there are habits you can give to your children that will help them build that resilience. Like Daniel, he had that habit of prayer. Now, I don't know about you, but I am a classic type B personality, ADHD, who is really bad at making habits. And if you don't want to raise your hand and admit it, that's okay. But even someone like me who's bad at habits, there are rhythms of our day that are just part of every day. You get up, you eat meals, you drive in the car, you typically drive your kids to school, there's bedtime. There are easy ways you could infuse these spiritual habits into those rhythms of your day, even if it's just a simple bedtime prayer that you do every single night, because faith is built on little tiny habits day after day.
Yeah,
you're making a huge impact just by doing a daily prayer with your child. Maybe it's a blessing you've got. Maybe there's another way that you find that works for you, maybe during a diaper change or something, but lean into those little tiny habits, parents, because it makes a difference. Another thing we saw actually, I wanted to share about stories. That's right, stories. So Daniel, just as he knew that he had the identity as God's family, I'm sure he grew up hearing stories of faith from the people that were in his family. And looking at pictures from your family is a good way to just tell the story of what God has done for you, how he's been faithful. My kids love looking at pictures of themselves. Do you like to do that too?
Yeah.
Yes. Most kids like to look at pictures of themselves, and before bed every night we look at pictures. And sometimes we use those to tell the story of how God has taken care of us. Some of you that know me well know that my son River has had some health challenges in his little life. He's only 5, but he spent 4 of those 5 years in and out of hospitals and surgeries, and he had a recurring cyst in his neck that was really confusing doctors. They didn't know why it kept coming back. And unfortunately, he had complication after complication after complication that landed him finally in the hospital for almost a month last summer, and he ended up with a feeding tube for 10 days. And when we go back and look through those pictures, I can say to him, that was so hard, but God took care of us. Remember how hard that day was? You handled it because God was with you. And throughout that whole season of life, I would remind him of the hard thing he just did to prepare him for the hard thing he's about to do.
Yeah.
If you can handle a shot, you can handle a blood draw.
Yeah.
If you can handle that hard therapy, you can handle an NG tube. And now we say, if you can handle an NG tube, you can handle anything. Anything. So I want to show you a few pictures of this because this kind of illustrates that's his attitude the first day, and then it moved on towards him being able to smile and have a little fun with it. And then eventually, once he was able to eat food again, I can't believe I captured this photo. He's literally, my rambunctious, loud, crazy boy, sat in quiet and closed his eyes with the first taste of real food on his mouth in 10 days, and he was in pure joy. And then I even have a little video of us going home from the hospital after 20 days, and we're in the elevator, and he's literally jumping for joy. But I tell him so often that because you can handle an NG tube, you can do anything. He's internalized that so much that I recently overheard him tell his 3-year-old little sister, Olive, if I can do an NG tube, you can do anything. And I'd love to be able to just hand that sense of confidence and capability to every kid. And then finally, this is the email I wanted to read you. This came from a student who volunteered for VBS. She's a teenager, but she had never before been involved in Messiah's ministry. She had never before volunteered in Messiah Kids or in any other place in Messiah's ministry. So she was really brave in trying a new thing, in stepping up, in signing up, in committing 25 hours that whole week to volunteer. And I noticed that she did an excellent job. And I pointed it out to her several times that week. I said, hey, you're really good at this. You're doing an excellent job. You're really making a difference. So much so that she emailed me the week after it was over and said, good evening, Miss Hannah. My name is, and I volunteered for VBS this past week. I really, really enjoyed working with the kids and spreading God's love to all of them. And I would really like to get more involved. How can I sign up to be on the Messiah Kids team? What's beautiful about that is she found purpose in her gifts, in her talents, in the way that God wired her, and saw that it connected her to a bigger story of what God was going to do through her, what God wanted to do with her. And so when you help kids see what they're good at, when you point it out to them, and when you remind them that God's got a plan for them, it builds that resilience too. Instead of just saying, hey, great job in the basketball game today, I saw that you showed a lot of teamwork. You showed resilience. You showed grit. I wonder how God is going to use that for you in the future. That's so cool that God created you to be a good friend. Way to go, sharing his love as you forgave that friend. You can just turn a little bit of the encouragement to your kids when you see them doing something amazing. Remind them God wired them that way, and he's got a plan for your life. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be amazing because God has a reason that you were born, that you were here.
That's awesome. Can you tell that she's a pastor's daughter? Yeah? I know. Isn't she so good?
Oh, gosh.
Her dad actually retires next month, right?
Next month, yeah.
Next month. So it's super exciting for him.
After 40 years. Yeah.
Tell him, as a pastor, you never really retire. We just make you do stuff.
He's hoping for that, actually, because a piece of his identity feels like it's missing a little bit now that he's not going to be the pastor, but we are trying to encourage him that he could come down to Missouri and babysit for a little bit now.
Yeah, that's right. You can call it a job. This is a perfect example. When we talk about jars of clay, it's really not about how beautiful this is. It's not even that it could be cracked, it could be broken or anything else, because that's how we are. But it's about what's inside us. It's about those important things. And when you're talking with your kids or your grandkids, one of the most important things you need to tell them is their identity. Don't let the bullies have that chance. Don't let the jerk at work have that chance. You be the voice that tells them what God thinks about them, what God thinks about them. And centering it in baptismal identity, I think, is a great way to do it. But that when you were talking about the stories and like those picture books, it's exactly what my daughter does. She loves to look through picture albums of her siblings, especially when they're off at college, just to kind of remember those stories. And then the other day, somehow they got a picture, I guess for my sister, I don't know, but a baby picture of me. And Alora's like, that looks like me. Well, you are my kid. So about 15 months ago, I had an Easter message, and I called it Joy Story. But we passed out make your own Forky kits. Does anybody remember that? And for that actual Sunday, I had to watch Toy Story 4. I hadn't seen it before. I had seen the earlier ones when my kids were little. And I thought, you know what, this is the perfect example of what this series is supposed to be. And what a Bible verse like 2 Corinthians, that section of Bible verses, what that can mean. Because Forky, all of Andy's toys are now owned by Bonnie. Andy's grown up, Bonnie's a kid, she gets his toys, and she loves them all, but her favorite is Forky, and part of the reason is because she made him. She made him from a spork, a pipe cleaner, a popsicle stick, etc. But Forky in the movie keeps wondering, like, am I a utensil? Am I a toy? Am I trash? And his famous line, he actually declares that I'm not a toy. I was made for soups, salads, maybe chili, and then the trash. And throughout the movie, he's trying to throw himself in the trash. And when I was watching this, I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is perfect. And now we're coming to this series where we're talking about from trash to treasure. I'm gonna tell you what, there are so many people that think they belong in the trash bin. There are so many people that feel like they're in the giveaway pile. And we as the church and we as families, we can say a lot about that. We can really change that for people. And it's not always easy because a lot of people who feel like they belong in the trash have been in the trash. Like they've gone through a lot. They've got a lot of baggage. I get it. But we represent a gospel of redemption. Redemption says you don't have to stay a slave. You can be free. And Christ is our Redeemer. He is the one that sets free the slaves, the prisoners. And so that's what the gospel is all about. The rest of the movie, Toy Story 4, Forky, the movie is about his journey to learn that he's been created, chosen, and marked. Bonnie literally puts her name on him. And he's been marked and designed to be a toy, that he's beloved and chosen. And I'm sure Pixar wasn't trying to do a gospel thing there, but as a Christian, I can't see a story like that and not think about what Christ has done for us. Because it's just like the way that God loves you and me. He didn't redeem us because we deserved it. He didn't pull us out. He doesn't resurrect us because we've earned it. He does it just because of his love. Forky feels like trash, but in the end, he realizes that he is really Bonnie's treasure. And too many people feel that way. Too many kids feel that way, especially. And especially when they struggle in life, by the way. It's when times are hard that we have to reinforce their identity all the more so that they never forget it. And so that's why we have to teach them their value to God. And that's why this topic of spiritual resilience, Hannah, is so important.
It's like, I don't know how God's going to use this, but God is going to use this some way. Just pointing them to him.
I mean, think about River.
Exactly.
He went through all this when he's 4. Tubes and all this stuff in the hospital, and you're telling him he can do anything. How's God going to use that when he's 20?
Exactly.
Or when he's 30?
Yeah, and we all have stories of that too. And you might not have thought about it in that light before, but you've had hardships that you've gone through that God used for something else. That's valuable to tell the people around you, and that's really valuable to tell your kids. Because when you tell a personal story, their ears perk up. They want to hear, oh, what's Dad have to say about a time where he went through hardship, but God used it for good? That makes a big difference. Another thing that makes a big difference just with this whole idea of resilience and finding your purpose in the world is that God has really, really big plans for you and big plans for your kids. And to illustrate this, I want to introduce you to a group called Dude Perfect. Raise your hand if you guys are familiar with Dude Perfect. Yes, a lot of you guys are. If you ask a lot of kids and teenagers who they are, they'll say, oh, they're the rock stars of the internet because they have amassed like 62 million subscribers and billions of views all around the world. They sell out stadiums for their tour, all because they're really good at trick shots. But instead of me just explaining it to you, I want to show you a video of their recent trick shots. Here's what I mean.
Cheetos.
The ground, just get on up when you get knocked down.
It's time to eat. Let's fire up the grill.
From the sound.
And in this day and age, I do have to clarify, none of that is AI. None of that is editing. That is really, truly, they got those trick shots in. But recently, they did a podcast, just in the last year, actually. It was all about how failure and teamwork has shaped their lives and shaped their success. And one of the guys actually said, I think our trick shot videos actually give people the wrong impression that we make every shot on our first try, but that is certainly not the case because part of succeeding is failing. So then they started putting together compilation videos like this.
Fire time.
Still working on the hat tosser?
Yes, so it takes them a lot of failure and resilience to get to where they need to be. But this came to a really great highlight, really great illustration just a couple years ago. They love to break Guinness World Records. They have dozens of them, but the latest one they wanted to do was highest basketball shot ever made by flinging a basketball from the top of a tower in Las Vegas that was 854 feet tall. And after 3 days in the desert and literally 900 attempts, they finally got it through. And someday you guys should go on YouTube and search it up because it is really amazing to watch. Because of course they were exhausted and frustrated and 900 shots in, but they finally made it happen. And then on that same podcast, as he was describing that win, the thrill of the amazing record that they broke, one of the guys, Corey, says, "We truly didn't think it would happen. And this whole time we've been praying, God, if this is supposed to happen, you're gonna have to do it because this seems crazy." And to this day, as silly as it is, there is no doubt to us that it was a God thing. We're not trying to over-spiritualize this, but if you're standing up there and you saw what we saw, you know it never should happen. Because these guys are clean Christian creators. They've been creating online for 20 years, and they're really bold about their faith. And in fact, they are part of the VBS curriculum we're gonna be using next summer. They've become big faith creators for kids specifically to share their faith. And they use fun trick shots as a hook to do it. Because they know that the resilience and finding their identity of what God made them to do was part of giving them this platform where they can now give God the credit for all the amazing things that they do.
You began this whole talk, you were talking about reminding your kids of their baptism. You talked about water guns and water balloons.
Yeah.
Do you know this week, literally, Chuck brought up the idea for our groundbreaking of maybe we get on the roof and shoot water balloons at people and say baptize?
I mean, raise the roof. It sort of makes sense.
Right,
Get on the roof,
off
right?
the roof, raise the roof. But I think the thing is, we're gonna have to get ready for next summer if we're gonna come up with our own trick shots, right?
Yeah.
Well, today was really all about the fifth value that we have here at Messiah. The faith of the next generation matters now, because if it doesn't matter now, it won't happen later. If we don't prioritize it now, it's not gonna happen later. And we prioritize it when they're young, at the very beginning. And then all along the way, we reinforce it and reinforce it and reinforce it. Because the most important thing to anybody who is a Christian parent or a Christian grandparent is that we want to pass on the faith to the next generation. Like, my faith is not my faith. It's our faith. It's our family's faith. And I know all of you, if you're here today, then in some way you're saying the exact same thing. And so let's make sure that we do that. I really want to thank you, Hannah, for the ministry that you do, for Ryan, the ministry that he does with our students, and the ministry, Max, that you guys in the school, now as our new school pastor, the ministry that you guys do over in the school to raise up the next generation, not just with the quality education, but giving them an identity that's rooted in Jesus. So church, I'm gonna invite you to stand.